Hi Year 6, we're going to read chapter 19 today from the viewpoint of Esker. At dawn they packed rucksacks full of food and flasks of water, and for a moment Esker felt sad that they were leaving the giant's beard, the place she and Balapin had come to call home. But then she remembered Whitefur's words. She had a par to rescue now, and the Skysong to discover. The Ice Queen's choir had sung all through the previous night and on into the early morning, and though it had stopped now, the fact that the anthem had sounded for so much longer than usual made Esker and Flint exchange anxious glances. The Ice Queen's power was growing and Esker's voice was getting weaker still. She couldn't see how it would be strong enough to silence the tribes, command animals and shake the skies. She had tried to pick out the individual voices when they sang, desperate to recognise her pal's voice. But no recollection came and she sat behind the waterfall, her hand on Balapin's back. She could feel the bird's heartbeat, sure and steady, beneath her feathers, and somehow that made her feel stronger. "Can you lead us to the lost chambers?" she whispered, "like you led me to Giant's Beard?" Balapin yapped and ruffled her feathers. Then she charged towards the waterfall, and Esker gasped as she shot through it and spiralled up into the air. Esker crossed the river to join Flint and Blue, with their skies and poles strapped to their backs. They followed the eagle up into the ravine and on through the gap in the hills which led out of the valley. The river snaked west, then ran towards the sea, but Balapin hurled her cry across the sky, beckoning them north and into the heart of Nevercliffs. At first the land climbed gently, but before long the hills built themselves up into jagged mountains, and though Pebble kept nibbling Flint's ear for food and Blue stumbled into the deeper snow, the group trudged on. After an hour though, they collapsed on top of a mountain and shared their water around. They go on and on, Esker panted as she looked out over the ridges that scored the horizon. Flint nodded. They're called the Never Peaks for a reason. Esker swallowed a mouthful of water. "Do you think most people feel like this before a quest?" "Like what?" Esker considered. "Small." So silently they watched the mountains, the slopes of ice, banks of scree and frozen waterfalls that hung like tapestries of frost. Then they listened to the rum of Balapin's wings above them. "If you couldn't count us all together," Flint said eventually, "you, me, Blue, Pebble and Balapin, we're not so small." Esker nodded. "Sort of tribe size when you think of it like that." Blue picked up a handful of snow and smoothed it between her mittens. "We go home to see Tompkin now. I love my brothers." Flint sighed. "No, Blue, I told you, remember? We won't see Tompkin until we've found the Frosthorn." He nudged her skis towards her. "We need to get your skis on so that we can find a quicker trail through the mountains." Blue stared at the skis. "Don't like them." Flint slotted her boot into the first binding. "You need to let me put them on, Blue. We've got a job to do, remember?" Blue narrowed her eyes, and then, to Esker's surprise, she threw her snowball in Flint's face. "Not doing skis," she snapped. "Don't like skis." Flint wiped the snow away. "You love skiing, Blue. I've seen you zip through deep roots after me and Tompkin." Blue turned away. "No." Flint lowered his voice. "Now you're just being difficult." Esker could see Flint trying to cling on to his patience, but when Blue folded her arms and pouted, his anger spilled out. "Fine," he muttered, flinging her poles into the snow and tightening his hood around Pebble. "If you're going to play difficult out onto the Nevercliffs, I'm going to play difficult too." And with that, he strapped his boots to his own skis, grabbed his poles and set off down the mountain at breakneck speed. Esker didn't know much about her tribe behaviour. Perhaps flinging poles around and pouting was perfectly normal, but she knew, from spending time with Balapin, about loyalty, and she crouched next to Blue. Her voice was quieter than Flint's, more scratched and far less of itself. "You can hold my hand for the first bit if you want, but you're probably going to be a lot better at this than me." Blue prodded the snow with her mittens. "I good skier. Speedy. I like fast. Ask big brother." But Blue was already shooting down the mountain, his skis slicing wide arcs into the powdery snow. Esker watched. He looked graceful, like a bird skimming the surface of a river, but also slightly furious in the way he jabbed his poles into each turn. "Come on," Esker said. "Let's go after him." Putting on the skis was easy enough, but as Esker poled her way towards the edge of the mountain with Blue, she swallowed. She'd never skied before. There was no way she'd keep up with the others. Balapin yapped from above and Esker knew what the noise meant. It was a call to move faster, to keep going. She lifted up her snood so that the fur was a snuggle around her cheeks, and then, gripping Blue's mitten, they set off. Blue, it turned out, only needed to be held for a second. As soon as her skis picked up speed, she let go of Esker and sailed on down the mountain after her brother. She wasn't graceful like him. Tucked into a wobbly crouch, she looked rather like a runaway cannonball. But she was getting down the mountain, which was more than could be said for Esker. She couldn't seem to find the nerve to point her skis downhill. Instead, she swerved across the side of the mountain with shaking knees, watching nervously as Flint pulled up on a ledge, and Blue careered over a little bump, then clattered into him. They were hugging, poles and pouts evidently forgotten, and Balapin yapped again. The eagle was getting impatient now, and so, drawing in deep breath, Eska tilted her skis down the hill. Her eyes streamed, her legs wobbled, and for a few seconds, Eska forgot to breathe. Then her calves grew sturdier, and her thighs tightened as she felt her way into the snow. Moments later, she was leaning into the slope, shifting her weight from one leg to another as she carved her mark into the mountain. She grinned. There was something she had done before. The pace, the balance, the thrill of winding deeper into the wild. Some patterns of behaviour, it seemed, couldn't be unlearned. And as she swished through the snow, a memory burnt in her mind. She was smaller than she was now, much smaller, and she was making her way down to a snowy mountain, her little skis framed by two larger ones that belonged to the man holding her up from behind. She could feel the softness of this wolf furs. She could hear the sound of his deep voice urging her on. She could smell the warmth of campfires and pine needles on his breath, and she knew without a shadow of a doubt that this was her pa. He had taught her how to ski. The memory vanished, and Eska pulled up in front of Flint and Blue, showering them both with a spray of snow. Blue grinned. "You good, Eska, better than Flint." Flint pulled Blue's hood down, over her eyes at that. Then he turned to Eska. "You did well." Eska blushed. "This is something I've done before with my pa. I can feel it." "I wasn't talking about the skiing." Flint glanced at Blue, who was feeding Pebble a clump of snow. Then he undid the straps of his skis and hoisted them back onto his back. "Though you're not bad at that either." He looked at his sister again. "It gets hard sometimes." Eska nodded. "I know. Especially since Ma and Pa left and Tompkins became chief. Most of the time it's just me and her. Not that I'm complaining. It's just hard sometimes." Eska swung her skis on her back. "You'd make a good eagle, you know." Flint laughed. "Why's that?" "Because you're protective and patient." Flint chewed his lip. "Some of the time." They traipsed up the mountain, and Eska wondered as she glimpsed Balapin disappear inside a cloud, then burst out of the other side. How much longer they'd have to go before they saw signs of the tribe hiding among the cliffs. They shared out some of the food Eska had cooked the night before. Then they made their way on and through the mountains, into the endless spring light, until eventually a late dusk fell and they came to a lake covered in black ice. Like a stain of ink, it squatted before the surrounding peaks, blocking the way ahead. There was no sparkle, no glint, no reflection of evening clouds on the ice, just a cold, dark mass of black. And at the sight of it, Pebble growled. "Devil's Dance Floor," Flint murmured. "Pa used to tell us stories about it. He said it was one of the deepest lakes in Erkenwald, and that's the reason it's black is because years ago the Feather tribe grew frightened of the storms that raged through the Nevercliffs, so they trapped the largest of the thunderclouds down inside the ice." He paused. "It's just a story, though." Eska watched Balapin soar above the lake. "We've got to cross it, haven't we?" "Your eagle seems to think so," Flint squinted, "and I could just make out a narrow path on the other side, winding on through the mountains." Eska bent down to unstrap her skis. "If it's black ice covering the lake, it'll be frozen solid, so it'll hold us, right?" Flint unfastened Blue's skis. "Absolutely." But, as they approached the shoreline, nobody said a word. Not even Blue, who watched Devil's Dance Floor with narrowed eyes. Cautiously, they placed their boots on the ice, and Eska waited for its creak and groan, but this was a slice of the wild that didn't talk. It lay silently beneath them, and as they walked out onto it, the sealskin soles of their boots stopping them from slipping. They looked left and right, and sometimes over their shoulders, because, although none of them said it, each felt that perhaps someone or something was watching them. It was only when they were inside the middle of the Devil's Dance Floor that the noises started. At first it was the drawn-out moan of ice, and it made the group bunch closer and rise up onto their tiptoes. But then another sound came, a restless rumbling from beneath the ice that spoke of thunder gathering many miles away. Eska's insides clenched. "Go quietly," she whispered to Blue and Flint, "and keep your eyes fixed on Balapin." For a few seconds, Flint and Blue did just that. Then the rumbles grew, like an enormous engine throbbing into life. Eska noticed Flint's hold on Blue's hand tighten, and she looked down. The lake was no longer a block of impenetrable black. It was a mirror clear, and beneath its frozen surface, things were moving. Long, thin arms that seemed to be made from trails of smoke reached up towards the ice and beat their fists against it. Eska felt her legs sway, their faces below the arms, mass of grey with gaping mouths, and they were calling with hungry voices. The Ice Queen came and cast her curse. "And thunder ghosts are much, much worse. Come dance with spectres locked in ice. Your whispers, though, won't quite suffice. One word out loud is all we need to drag you down and fill our greed." Eska gulped. So the stories Flint's pa had told him were true. The Feather tribe had locked a thundercloud inside the lake, but now the Ice Queen had manipulated it to do her bidding. What does that mean? If you are doing someone's bidding, what does that mean?
Doing it for some.
Yeah, doing someone else's job or doing what they tell you. Eska kept her voice low as she turned to Flint and Blue. Whatever you do, don't raise your voices above a whisper. She put a finger to her lips to check that Blue had understood, and when the little girl nodded, the ground kept walking. But when two large fists pummeled at the ice between her boots, Blue couldn't stop her fear spilling out. "I scared, Flint," she cried. "Scared." What happened next happened fast. The ice beneath Blue's feet fell away, and in one swift slice she shot down into the lake. Where she had been standing, the surface closed up to form a shield of solid ice, and then it was not only the fists of the Thunder Ghost beating a blow. Blue's small hands raged against the ice, while wisps of grey swirled around her. So, Blue has been taken down under the ground, under the Thunder Ghost Lake. So you will have to wait until next week to find out what happens. Miss Evans will be back reading next week. Have a great weekend, Year 6.